was watching clips earlier of the popular British science documentary programme Tomorrow's World. And it was broadcast, I believe, from the 1960s up to the early 2000s, but don't quote me on that. And it was a popular show, and it looked at the contemporary technology and how that could be utilised both in the present and then future potential technology. That generally was the focus of the show, not just technology, but life in general. It was a popular show, it was fact-based, and they always had little demonstrations and so on. I saw two clips. One was an interview with children in 1966, school children, about 10 years old, and they were talking about what they thought life in the year 2000 would be like. And what was interesting is how smart these kids were, how astute they were. It wasn't sort of silly things about bog-eyed aliens. It was, they were talking about potential nuclear escalation or wealth poverty gaps, this sort of thing. And how one girl said that technology might make people not communicate with each other. Actually, I think it was a little boy said that. But interesting to see. Another clip from 1978 was about the usage of mobile phones. At that time, they were working with a very early prototype, one of those big handheld things, but this was in the concept of being commercially available as opposed to just, at that time, walkie-talkies would have been used perhaps by law enforcement and others, spies, etc. Anyway, discussing the potential of that being used in the future. So I thought would be relevant to this conversation or this video, and this is one I wanted to make for a few days, namely that technology, in my opinion, it's something that we need to be wary of, in the sense that when it works well, it can be very, very good. It could be very advantageous for humankind. It can do a lot of good things. It can help, for example, in terms of medical equipment. It can help in terms of campaigns. If you have, there's a thing online nowadays, for instance, whereby if there's a big natural disaster somewhere, though granted it tends to be in developed countries, people can mark themselves as safe. That would have been impossible in the past. I mean, if you had a friend in, say, just as an example, Spain, you wouldn't know if they were safe or not from wildfires. Today, they can mark themselves safe. If there's an earthquake somewhere, in California or Taiwan, I stress this is more used in developed parts of the world, then people can mark themselves as safe or not. That's just one example. So in this video, I don't want to give the impression that I'm anti-technology, because I'm not. But there are certain things I'm wary of. Definitely the advance of AI is something that is controversial. In fact, I think that warrants a whole video of its own. And I'll probably make one in due course. But to be honest, I am more on the side of caution. Some people are welcoming it, absolutely. I'm more on the side of we need to be a little bit cautious about this. But like I say, that's worth a video in its own right. So stay tuned, I'll try and get around to that. Technology can definitely have usages. I mean, in terms of recovery, in disasters, there's all sorts of things that technology could be used for. All sorts of things. Generators in a natural disaster, digital technology in terms of spreading information, campaigning, drawing awareness to causes. There's all sorts of positive things. But there's absolutely a negative side as well. We've seen that on social media, and increasingly there's debates around censorship. I know, for example, there is a lot of controversy around the UK's Online Safety Act. Ostensibly it's designed to protect children, but critics argue its breadth goes too wide, and it can be used for basically censorship. I want to talk about what I want to focus on in this video, specifically for this video, is the usage of technology in entertainment, which might sound trivial, but it's one of those things that we will come across. And I'm going to cite an example of this: Omniplex cinemas. Now, my city, Sunderland, for a long time we had a cinema that then closed in, let me get this right, 2004 to 2000 and what year was it? 2023. Yes, 2004 to 2023. In the 5 years preceding that, there'd been no cinema in Sunderland. So 2004 to 2023, we had a big multiplex, Empire Cinemas, and then it closed in 2023. And for that period, I was going to the View in Gateshead, which is a really good cinema. I like that cinema. I am a fan of the big screen. I do enjoy the cinema. I just don't think online screening competes with it. Online screening, streaming, excuse me, has its own merits. You know, you can enjoy it with your partner. Despite our long distance, I sometimes watch movies with my girlfriend. We basically just log in at the same time and watch a movie, and I enjoy that. It's it's a good thing, but you can't really beat the big screen in terms of that experience. Now, I am a supporter of the idea, do not fix something that isn't broken, and I think this very much applies to technology. So anyway, our cinema was closed for quite a while, and a new branch opened up in 2020. Let me get this right. It was either late 24 or early this year. I think it might have been early this year. I can't remember the precise date. But it reopened as Omniplex Cinemas, which is an Irish chain. Now, at first there were no major changes. It was basically the same screens were being used. This was the same building the company took over. And that was good at first. I thought, okay, great, we've got a cinema again. Because as much as I like the View in Gateshead, to go there, I don't drive, so I had to get the metro into Gateshead, which means the cost of the metro, so that adds up. As for Cineworld, it's just far too expensive. We have a Cineworld branch in Bolton Colliery, which is just to the north of Sunderland, but it's just too expensive. Average tickets there are about $12.99. It's too much. So Omniplex at reasonable prices, similar to Empire, and they're always good. But in the last sort of month, they have really been going through a big revamp. And I want to say this is just my experience. Other people might disagree. Other people might have had a very good experience. But what I've found is things have not become simpler. Things have become more difficult from a consumer perspective. So for my birthday, my girlfriend decided to get me a voucher, an Omnipass. Right, so the value of £20, which would be enough to see 2 movies. She knows I love movies, so this was a thoughtful gift. She knows I'm making this video, so yeah. And basically we had nothing but stress from that experience. What basically happened was I tried to activate it online in order to see a movie, and it just would not accept the passcode. They give you a little digital number. It just would not accept it. And I tried numerous times, it did not work. She tried on her end. She happens to be in Los Angeles at the moment. It did not work on her end. Okay. So I went directly into the cinema to see if we can try it that way. I should say initially she tried to just get me a ticket on her end, and that didn't work, so that's why she got the Omnipass. So I went directly into the cinema, and it didn't work on their end. It just would not activate. This card is invalid. And I was quite defensive. I said, look, my girlfriend's definitely paid for this. I've seen the confirmation email. She has definitely paid for it. They apologised, but they just couldn't do anything about it. And the assistant, he tried his best, but he didn't know what the problem was. And had I paid for it in the cinema, it would have been £1 more. So that was not ideal. They said their tills were not working. Right, so I couldn't just buy a ticket. Tills weren't working. I hope that's a temporary issue. Anyway, I then tried it on the machines. That didn't work. So they gave me an email to contact. I contacted the email, and the person on the other end just wasn't picking up what I was trying to explain. Well, in the end, and I am saying this in the case of transparency and fairness, it was the early hours of the morning, and the manager himself got in touch with me because I contacted them on their Facebook page. Just, I was stressed out. I was just trying to find some solution to this. Now, the manager, to his credit, he did go out of his way to try and get a solution to this. And it transpired that because Omniplex is an Irish chain, their primary currency is in euros. So I think what had happened is when my girlfriend bought this, there had been something wrong with the transition. I mean, really, we were talking four currencies. Initially, it was pesos, then she was paying in dollars. Well, actually, three currencies. I don't think she paid in pesos. But regardless, the dollars then had to convert to pounds. But instead of converting to pounds, it must have converted into euros. But regardless, something happened along the way. Okay, so eventually, the manager said he'd get in touch with their HQ in Dublin. Um, and eventually they said, okay, we'll give you a refund. But this was ridiculous. It was going in circles, going back and forth just to get this done. Because what I'd initially said is, look, can you either please give me a replacement card or a refund, one of the two. And they said, sorry, we can't do that in the cinema. They couldn't just do that. So that was a stressful experience. Now, it has been resolved. My girlfriend has got a refund, but it should not be that complicated to get a refund. So I would say that Omniplex seems to be a bit more flexible with situations like that. I suppose, to be fair, most people are going to pay within the country, so perhaps it is an unusual situation. But really, for a cinema branch to not be able to give a refund is a bit ridiculous. Any other business, if you, let's say you go into a shop, some high street clothes store, and the clothes are the wrong size and you want to exchange them or something, you'd probably get a refund, or there's some tear or something like that. You'd get a refund. Why can't a cinema chain do that? Another issue I have with Omniplex is they've went out of the way to make the place really luxurious, and granted, it does look great. They've got very comfortable seats. They've now got even bedding seats, like on a higher tariff. It looks impressive inside. It does. It looks very fancy. It looks very state of the art. All of that. But my contention is, if you make it difficult for customers at the base point just to get a ticket, all of that doesn't count for much. So what you need to do now in order to get a ticket at Omniplex is you have to go online, pay for it online using your card, unless you set up an account, and I guess I'll look into that, but really people shouldn't have to do that just to get a ticket. Okay, so I sign in as a guest, I get the ticket, fill in my card details, but they give you a time limit, 5 minutes. And when you're trying to find the right seat, when you're trying to focus on everything, it's not that long. Then they send you an email with a QR code. Now, I have a useless phone. I'll just say it. It's a crap phone. It's useless. But just about takes pictures. So I could do that. Take a picture of the QR code. I go in, show the QR code, and so far that hasn't been a problem. But this is the point I'm making. It shouldn't be that complicated just to get a ticket. You shouldn't put the onus on a customer to have to log in online, book it online, get an email, take a picture of the QR code. That's not as straightforward as just going in and buying a ticket. When my dad tried to do that, they said, well, we'll let you do it this once, but it's not our usual procedure. Well, why not? I mean, I'm a 40-year-old man. I think, what about like my people in my parents' generation in the 70s? This isn't to be ageist, but it's just true. Most people of that generation are not that technically savvy. Some of them will have smartphones, but QR code this, QR code that. What I have a problem with is this attitude of one size fits all. Oh, well, everyone uses smartphones, everyone could get the QR code. Not so. I mean, what about someone who might be partially sighted, for instance? It's not as easy for them to expect them to just go in and log in online and do it all online. And so that's my contention with over-reliance on technology. And incidentally, more often than not, the website is giving me a message saying, invalid request, check again half an hour later. That wouldn't happen if you just went to a till, bought the ticket, go through. So now they're relying on the ticket list system. Maybe that's an eco thing. Maybe they're trying to save paper waste. But whatever the situation, I don't think it's as straightforward as before. And I gave quite a candid review a while back before I had my issue with the Omnipass. And I don't want to be like, oh, this guy again, he's complaining again. But as a consumer, I strongly believe consumers have a right to raise frustrations and concerns if they're experiencing problems. I don't think it's whining. I don't think it's being unreasonable. Cinema's like everything else. have increased in price. So it's reasonable for customers to give some feedback, especially when they make changes without asking the customers. I mean, to me, it looks wonderful, and it does. The seats are comfortable, it looks great, but no one asked for it. What was wrong with the system before? There was nothing wrong with it. You went in, you bought the ticket, you sat down, and you enjoyed the movie. That was it. What was wrong with that? So the point I'm making with this video is, when it comes to technology, yes, there's going to naturally be advances, but there is also a case that sometimes don't fix what isn't broken. Something may be working perfectly fine, and then you get companies, and I'm sure not Omniplex isn't the only one, they just change things without consulting anyone. We're going to go through this revamp or this reforms or whatever. We're not going to ask anyone, and you just have to adapt to it. So they put the onus on the consumer. It's irritating. So if I had no camera on my phone, it's a very basic phone, but does have that. How would I basically be able to see a movie? How would I be able to do that without a QR code? So it's really not flexible. I think what we're losing with the over-reliance on technology generally is a reduction in good customer skills. Now, again, I want to emphasize the manager himself. If there's some remote chance that he's watching this video, he did help out. He did go out of his way, so I'm grateful to him. But it's the system. I'm sure it's not his say. I'm sure it's coming from above. The CEO of Omniplex. Okay, we're going to do it this way. I'm sure every Omniplex branch is the same. I wonder, is Cineworld doing that now? I wonder, is you doing it now? Why? Why make life more complicated? This is the issue I have. We always hear that technology is meant to make life easier, but is it really? How is it making life easier when you just end up feeling stressed out trying to work something out? And I don't consider myself a Luddite. There's a lot of things I can do online. Obviously, I'm running this channel. There's a lot of things I can do, but I do have a problem with just kind of imposing technology on people and saying, you have to adapt or else you're going to be left out. And then people are kind of looked down on if they can't keep up with it. I really have a problem with that. At least give people a choice. I would say that would be the best solution. Okay, go with the QR code thing, fine. Maybe some people do find that more convenient, but for myself, and I'm sure others, it's more convenient to just go to the counter, get a ticket and go in. What's wrong with that? So, technology has many usages, but I have a problem with over-reliance on technology. I came across a video not long ago where there was a new development in Japan whereby you sit in a public lavatory and there's apparently some sort of, I don't know if it's AI, but some sort of technology gives you a whole health report and it can send it to you. I'm thinking, if I'm going to the bathroom, I go to relieve myself. I don't want to go to get a big health report about, there is an argument that may help, for example, men detect prostate cancer or something, but I think people would also see that as a violation of privacy. A lot of the comments were positive. I was honestly a bit more cynical. I was saying, well, wait a second. It's a bit intrusive. I don't want to be sitting on a John and finding that where's that information going to? Who's saying it? There's valid questions about that. For me, the problem in this debate is that anyone who raises concerns or questions or critiques is dismissed as being anti-progress. Well, I've said that there is many advantages to technology. I recognise that. But I do think we need to be treated with some caution. How many times have people had to deal with companies where something goes wrong and they try to get help and it isn't even a human being, it's some automated response. Automated responses are the worst invention in my opinion because they absolutely lack nuance. They lack that sort of common sense of human communication. You have preset answers, sometimes are relevant, but most of the time, in my experience, is useless. And I will say, look, I want to speak to a human being. I want to speak to a human agent. And even then, it's not a guarantee because people are trained in such a way as to be computer says no. It's very frustrating. So I just don't like the way that anyone who raises questions or talks about the frustrations they experience is dismissed as being anti-progress or against technology. I'm not against technology. I think that when it works well, it's a wonderful thing. I mean, I'm using a laptop right now to talk to my subscribers who could be in the UK or in other countries. This would have been a fantasy 30 years ago. So I am grateful for technology, and when it works, it can be a wonderful thing. It really can. So I recognise that positive side. I just think that we can be over reliant on it, and it can also cost jobs, incidentally. If we rely too much on technology, it's going to replace humans doing the jobs, so that's going to cause problems there. For me, you can't be well trained customer service, and when I say well trained, I mean people that use common sense. Obviously, some customer service is bad, but at least then you can complain to the manager. But that's another thing I want to bring up in this whole debate, this whole subject. In recent years, we've heard this phenomenon of so-called Karens, right? The general notion is American middle-aged white women. That's basically the stereotype of what a Karen is. An American woman circa, let's say 45 to 60, or maybe 40 to 60. She's middle class, she's white, and she is very demanding. That's the stereotype. And she always wants to see the manager. Now, I've no doubt there are women out there who are like that. But I find it a little bit sexist, and I find it a little bit, if there may actually be a valid basis to complain. If a woman is unhappy with service, if she's a paying customer, why shouldn't she complain? So I have a little bit of a problem with that term, because I think sometimes it's used just as a catch-all. And why don't we have a male equivalent? It's a bit sexist towards women. Why isn't there a male equivalent of Karen? I mean, I'm sure there's men out there who like to complain all the time. And the idea it's just white women is also false. I'm sure there's minority people who complain a lot. So these sort of new terminologies that we hear aren't always helpful. And why Karen? Why not call it, oh, she's an Amy, or she's a Susan, or she's a whatever? It just seems like a bit of a stigmatizing term. I'm sure there are women out there who won't find any reason to complain and who are just difficult when someone is trying their best to help. But I think it's being used a little bit as a catch-all for anyone who has valid complaints. And I'm going to mention this briefly because I don't want to go off topic, but there was a popular show in the UK for a while called Airline. This isn't entirely about technology, but it's not totally unrelated. It was a good show and it was interesting. It was kind of a documentary about EasyJet staff. I found it an interesting show. My one criticism of it, though, is it was a bit biased towards EasyJet and the staff. For instance, there was an episode or a clip saying, man has tantrum over dispute with airline. And you look at this and you think, okay, this is going to be another person blaming the airline for their own mistake. Because a lot of people would turn up late and then somehow think it was the airline's fault that they weren't let on board. However, in this case, the guy had actually had a guarantee on the phone that there would be a seat reserved because there'd been a situation with traffic. Now, someone from EasyJet messed up by telling him that. That is genuinely not his fault. If he had an assurance from someone from the company, why give that assurance? So I do feel that sometimes, it really wasn't the passenger's fault. What about the appalling airline practice of overbooking? I say appalling because the people who are penalised are innocent consumers. Airlines do it because sometimes you have no-shows and that costs the airline money. Well, the obvious answer there is fine the no-shows. Don't take it out on people who do what they need to do and turn up on time. So you have a family turning up and the airline just says, oh sorry, some of you can't travel. We've been overbooked. Well, that's your fault. That isn't the fault of the passengers. So I think it's a terrible practice and I think airlines need to drop it and find another way to make up money. Fine the passengers who don't show up. That's the obvious answer. But don't take it out on passengers who do show up. Anyway, I digress. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on this. I just think that technology can be a wonderful thing, but I have a problem with over-reliance on it. And I have a problem with treating people like they're idiots if they find certain technology to be stressful when it isn't working. And I think that companies need to be a little bit more flexible, not just rely on QR codes or download the app. That's an expression I really have a problem with. Download the app. Well, a lot of people have smartphones, probably the majority, but not everyone does. So it's unfair to exclude people just because they can't afford the latest technology. It should be flexible enough to say, here's the option to buy a ticket. Just buy a ticket. What is wrong with that? So yeah, don't fix what isn't broken. I think that does apply. So Omniplex, again, if the manager happens to be watching, the guy was helpful. He tried his best, but the system is absolutely not helpful. It's what's the point of having luxury if you lack basic customer service? And I'm not saying here, I kept saying to the young guy who was serving me, look, I know it's not you personally, it's just the system. So whoever is making these decisions at the top, it's a bad system. It's not user friendly. All it does is cause more stress. It should be simple to just go to a cinema and buy a ticket. It shouldn't be you have to go online and then take a picture of the QR code and wait for the email and do it within the time frame and all the rest of it. That's nonsense. It should be simple to go to the cinema. I mean, I actually had to buy tickets for my parents this evening because they wouldn't have been able to go in and just ask for a ticket. It's ridiculous. Let me know your thoughts on reliance on technology.